What do the Hollywood classics Stagecoach, Gone with the Wind, His Girl Friday, Scarface, and The Shop Around the Corner have in common? They all have the legendary screenwriter Ben Hecht behind them. The man behind some of the most exciting and groundbreaking films throughout cinematic history, including the highest grossing film of all time. But,
frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Because today, we're not talking about any of those films. Today, we're talking about my favorite Hecht film. Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious. Ben Hecht has always been somewhat of a rebel, working on films that challenged Hollywood's own guidelines, such as 1932's Scarface, which helped define the gangster film in an era where Hollywood's own motion picture production code didn't allow any murder on screen. To get around this, director Howard Hawks had to stage each gangster hit just out of frame to get the film past its censors. Or remember this?
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
The production code didn't allow any profanity throughout the 1930s, making this line go down in history as the first use of vulgar language in modern cinema. Hecht was always one step ahead of the game, and he didn't lose his edge when he started working with Hitchcock in the 1940s. On the contrary, in 1948 he worked on Hitchcock's Rope, which features two men in the lead who are implied to be romantic partners, as they try to keep a murder hidden during a dinner party. In fact, the secret shared between these two young men, which they hope won't get exposed, could be read as a metaphor for homosexuality. Another daring choice at the time, even getting this film banned in several American cities. This was something so taboo at the time that the sexual orientation of the two leads was just referred to as it on set.
Brandon, how did you feel? When? During it?
Compared to all these incredibly progressive examples, Notorious might seem quite conservative. A classically structured film, shot in a similarly classical fashion, a quite ordinary post-war thriller on the surface, but at its core lies a deconstruction of the classic Hollywood leading man just as progressive as our other examples. Notorious tells the story of Alicia Huberman, the daughter of a German war criminal, as she gets recruited by Special Agent Devlin to work for the US government as an undercover spy. She refuses at first, pretending to share her father's hatred of America, when Devlin reveals a secret recording of a private conversation between her and her father.
I hate you all. And I love this country, do you understand that? I love it. I'll see you all hanged before I raise a finger against it.
Through this recording, we're cleverly and immediately made aware of Alicia's true motivations, which she would have never shared with Devlin otherwise. Her mask is off. From this point on, she's an open book to Devlin, and her whole life is suddenly turned into a performance as she moves to Brazil to seduce Alexander Sebastian, an old friend of her father, in order to spy on him.
Perhaps I can help you to forget. I'd like to.
It's odd, but I feel at home with you.
Pretending to be someone else and hiding your true self are important themes in this film. Sociologist Irving Goffman would describe this in theatrical terms in his book The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. We're always performing a role when interacting with others, constantly acting, adhering to certain expectations of our role in society as not to get caught as an outsider. And we see those practices clearly reflected in Alicia, who changes her presentation of self around drastically as she switches between her role as husband of Alexander and lover of Devlin, the struggle of which is portrayed wonderfully by the great Ingrid Bergman. But that same struggle of pretending and hiding is reflected more subtly in Devlin's arc, for ever since Devlin caught Alicia in the act of her performance, she is unable to be anything but truthful to him, confessing her love for him on multiple occasions. And although Devlin feels the same way, he's unable to return her honesty, being stuck in his role as an agent, as a man even, which doesn't allow him to present himself vulnerably. His performance seemed fueled by his pride and his embarrassment of showing emotion. These differences in performing roles finally come to a clash when the two meet up right before the third act. Devlin has decided to leave town because he can't bear the position he has put Alicia in. And by way of Hitchcock's trademark dramatic irony, Alicia is already aware of that fact, without Devlin's knowing. And she asks him, during their supposed final meeting, whether he's leaving, giving him one last opportunity to drop his act and reveal his true self to her.
Don't you find Rio a little hard to take to?
Not a bad town.
And when he doesn't, it's heartbreaking. The biggest obstacle our hero has to overcome is showing he cares for Alicia, which is something he's finally able to do as the film comes to a close.
I had to see you once speak my piece. I was getting out because I love you. I couldn't bear seeing you and him together.
Oh, you love me. Why didn't you tell me before?
I know.
Notorious does away with the Hollywood leading man in exchange for a more insecure hero, even if he might not show it. The film shows a man struggling with his masculine role, being unable to open himself up when confronted with real emotion. A man scared of being vulnerable. These are themes still relevant to reflect upon today, when most action heroes are still completely devoid of emotional expression. And of course, it wouldn't be a Ben Hecht film if it didn't challenge the motion picture production code. So while the production code only allowed a kiss to last 3 seconds at most, Hitchcock got around that rule by making the two leads break off every 3 seconds, but making the whole sequence last a full 2.5 minutes, making this, at the time, the longest kiss in cinematic history. Ben Hecht was making thought-provoking, forward-thinking films throughout his career, and Notorious is my favorite example of that, with its airtight script, its subtle critique of the modern man, and its final hooray against a dying motion picture production code. And that's why I love it.